In the spring of 1945, as Allied forces swept across Germany, they weren't just looking for Nazi soldiers. They were hunting for something far more valuable, the brilliant minds behind Hitler's most advanced weapons. This is the story of Operation Paperclip, one of the most controversial and secretive programs in American history. What if I told you that the same scientists who built rockets for the Third Reich would later send Americans to the moon? That men who used slave labor in concentration camps would become respected figures in the US military-industrial complex? This isn't conspiracy theory, it's documented history, and it changed the course of the Cold War forever. As World War II drew to a close in early 1945, American and Soviet forces were racing toward Berlin from opposite directions. But this wasn't just about capturing territory, it was about capturing technology. The Nazis had made astonishing advances in rocketry, jet engines, chemical weapons, and aeronautics. Both the Americans and Soviets knew that whoever seized these technologies, and the scientists who created them, would have a decisive advantage in the post-war world. The epicenter of Nazi rocket development was a massive underground facility called Mittelwerk, carved into the Harz Mountains near Nordhausen. Here, using slave labor from the nearby Mittelbau-Dora, in a concentration camp, the Nazis produced V-2 rockets at an incredible pace. When American troops reached the area in April 1945, they found something beyond their imagination. Thousands of rocket components, complete technical documentation, and the remnants of the most advanced weapons program on Earth. At the center of this story is one man, Wernher von Braun. Tall, charismatic, and brilliant, von Braun was the technical director of the Nazi rocket program and a major in the SS. Born in 1912 to Prussian nobility, von Braun became obsessed with space travel as a teenager. By his early 20s, he was leading Germany's rocket development program. He didn't particularly care about Nazi ideology. His passion was reaching space, but he was willing to work with anyone who would fund his dreams. Under von Braun's leadership, the Nazis developed the V-2, the world's first ballistic missile. It was a technological marvel, traveling faster than the speed of sound, reaching the edge of space before plummeting down on London and Antwerp. Over 3,000 V-2s were launched against Allied targets, killing approximately 9,000 people. But the true horror wasn't in London, it was in production. More people died building V-2 rockets than were killed by them. An estimated 12,000 to 20,000 concentration camp prisoners perished in the Mittelwerk factory, worked to death in brutal conditions while producing von Braun's rockets. Von Braun visited the factory regularly. He knew what was happening, and he did nothing to stop it. As Germany collapsed, von Braun faced a choice. He could surrender to the Soviets, who were closer, but he knew what they'd do to Nazi officers. The British had been bombed by his rockets. The French would show no mercy. That left the Americans. Von Braun gathered his top team of engineers and scientists, about 500 people, and led them south through chaotic, war-torn Germany. They hid crucial documents in an abandoned mine and planned their surrender carefully. On May 2, 1945, von Braun's brother Magnus approached American soldiers with a simple message in broken English. "My name is Magnus von Braun. My brother invented the V-2. We want to surrender." The Americans could hardly believe their luck. Within days, US intelligence officers were interrogating von Braun and his team. They quickly realized they'd captured the crown jewel of Nazi technology. But there was a problem. Official US policy explicitly prohibited bringing Nazi war criminals to America. Von Braun and many of his colleagues were members of the SS and the Nazi Party. Under the rules, they should have been prosecuted, not recruited. Someone would have to bend those rules. The operation that would bring Nazi scientists to America needed a code name. According to legend, intelligence officers would attach paperclips to the files of scientists they wanted to recruit, marking them for special handling. Thus, Operation Paperclip was born. The program was initially called Operation Overcast, but was renamed in March 1946. Its mission was simple: identify and recruit German scientists, engineers, and technicians, and get them to America before the Soviets could. President Harry Truman authorized the program in August 1945, but with strict conditions. The directive stated, "No person found to have been a member of the Nazi Party and more than a nominal participant in its activities, or an active supporter of Nazi militarism, shall be brought to the US." It was a clear order, but it would be systematically ignored. The Joint Intelligence Objectives Agency, JIOA, was tasked with vetting the German scientists. When they found Nazi Party memberships, SS affiliations, or evidence of war crimes in the scientists' files, they simply rewrote them. They changed ardent Nazi to not a Nazi. They erased SS memberships. They removed references to concentration camp visits. They fabricated new backgrounds that would pass government scrutiny. It was a massive cover-up, conducted with the full knowledge of military intelligence. The justification? The Cold War was beginning, and America needed every advantage it could get against the Soviet Union. In September 1945, the first group of German rocket scientists arrived at Fort Strong in Boston Harbor. Von Braun and his core team followed shortly after, settling at Fort Bliss in Texas and the nearby White Sands Proving Ground in New Mexico. The Americans had also shipped hundreds of captured V-2 rockets to White Sands. The plan was simple. The German scientists would teach the Americans everything they knew about rocketry. Life for the German scientists was strange. They were technically enemy aliens under military custody, but they lived in relative comfort. They received good salaries, had access to research facilities, and could bring their families over from war-ravaged Germany. But they weren't free. They couldn't leave the base without permission. They were monitored constantly, and they were hidden from the public. The American people had no idea that former Nazi scientists were now working for the US military. Between 1946 and 1951, the German team conducted over 60 V-2 launches at White Sands, teaching American engineers everything about large-scale rocketry. These tests laid the groundwork for America's missile and space programs. But Operation Paperclip wasn't just about rockets. The US military was also interested in Nazi medical research, particularly in aviation medicine. One of the most controversial recruits was Hubertus Strughold, known as the father of space medicine. Strughold had worked at the Luftwaffe's Institute for Aviation Medicine, where horrific experiments were conducted on concentration camp prisoners. These experiments included subjecting prisoners to extreme altitudes without oxygen, freezing them in ice water to test survival times, and conducting pressure chamber tests that caused excruciating pain and death. Evidence suggests Strughold attended a 1942 conference where these experiments were discussed in detail. After the war, he denied any knowledge of or participation in these atrocities. The US military chose to believe him, or at least to look the other way. Strughold was brought to America, where he became a pioneering figure in space medicine at Brooks Air Force Base. He helped develop the life support systems used in the Mercury and Apollo programs. His contributions were real, his past was horrifying, and the US government decided his future value outweighed his past crimes. By 1947, Operation Paperclip had expanded far beyond rockets and aviation medicine. The program eventually brought over 1,600 German scientists, engineers, and technicians to America, along with thousands of family members. They worked in diverse fields, rocketry and spaceflight at White Sands, and later at NASA, chemical weapons at Edgewood Arsenal in Maryland, biological warfare at Fort Detrick, aviation at Wright-Patterson Air Force Base, electronics and radar at various defense contractors. In 1950, von Braun and his team were transferred to Huntsville, Alabama, to work at the Redstone Arsenal. This sleepy southern town would become the heart of America's rocket program. The Germans thrived there. They received security clearances. They became U.S. citizens. Their children attended American schools. To their neighbors, they were just foreign-born engineers working on defense projects. Few knew the truth about what these men had done during the war. On October 4, 1957, the Soviet Union shocked the world by launching Sputnik, the first artificial satellite. America was stunned. How had the Soviets beaten them into space? The answer was complicated, but part of it involved Operation Paperclip, the Soviet equivalent of Paperclip. The USSR had captured their own German rocket scientists in 1946, forcibly relocating them to Russia. America needed to respond, and they turned to their secret weapon, Wernher von Braun. On January 31, 1958, just 4 months after Sputnik, von Braun's team successfully launched Explorer 1, America's first satellite. The rocket that carried it, the Jupiter C, was a direct descendant of the Nazi V-2. Suddenly, von Braun was no longer a secret. He became a public figure, appearing on television, writing popular articles about space travel, and advising Walt Disney on science documentaries. When President Kennedy announced in 1961 that America would land a man on the moon, von Braun was put in charge of developing the Saturn V rocket that would make it possible. The former Nazi SS officer had become America's most famous rocket scientist. On July 16, 1969, a massive Saturn V rocket lifted off from Cape Kennedy, carrying 3 American astronauts toward the moon. 4 days later, Neil Armstrong took his famous small step on the lunar surface. It was America's greatest technological achievement, and it was powered by a rocket designed by Wernher von Braun and his team of former Nazi engineers. Von Braun watched from mission control, surrounded by acclaim. He was celebrated as a visionary, a pioneer, an American hero. But the dark irony wasn't lost on everyone. Some observers noted that the same engineering brilliance that sent men to the moon had once rained terror on London. The same obsession with reaching space had been fed by slave labour and death. Tom Lehrer, the satirical songwriter, captured this contradiction perfectly in his song Wernher von Braun. Once the rockets are up, who cares where they come down? That's not my department, says Wernher von Braun. For decades, the truth about Operation Paperclip remained classified. The American public didn't know that former Nazi scientists were in their midst, working on their most sensitive military programs. But in the 1970s and 1980s, investigative journalists and historians began uncovering the truth. Declassified documents revealed the extent of the program and the systematic whitewashing of Nazi pasts. Some cases were particularly damning. Arthur Rudolph, who had been operations director at Mittelwerk, where thousands of prisoners died building V-2 rockets, became a key figure in the Saturn V program. In 1984, facing investigation for war crimes, he renounced his US citizenship and fled to West Germany rather than face prosecution. The controversy forced a national conversation. Had America made a deal with the devil? Was it justified by the Cold War? Can technological achievement ever excuse moral compromise? There were no easy answers. Today, Operation Paperclip remains one of the most controversial programs in American history. It achieved its goals. America gained a decisive technological advantage over the Soviet Union and won the space race. Modern space exploration, satellite technology, and ballistic missile defense all trace their lineage back to those German scientists. But the moral cost was real. Justice was denied to victims of Nazi atrocities. War criminals were given comfortable lives and prestigious careers. And a dangerous precedent was set that strategic value could trump moral accountability. Von Braun himself seemed to live with these contradictions. He never truly apologized for his role in slave labor deaths, claiming ignorance or powerlessness. Yet he also expressed regret about the destruction his V-2 rockets caused. In his final years, he focused on peaceful space exploration, perhaps seeking redemption through achievement. The legacy of Operation Paperclip reminds us that history is rarely simple. Progress often comes with uncomfortable compromises, and the line between hero and villain can sometimes depend on which side of history you're standing on. As we continue to reach for the stars, we carry this complicated legacy with us, a reminder that how we achieve our goals matters just as much as whether we achieve them. The rockets that took us to the moon were built by dreamers, but some of those dreamers had blood on their hands. That's the truth of Operation Paperclip, and it's a truth we must never forget.